In this video, we'll be taking a look at 5 college basketball games happening on February 14, 2026, and providing you with free team picks and total picks for each one of those games, so 10 picks in total. Welcome back to Cash Out Sports. Let's dive right into it. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe and to click the bell icon to get notified as soon as these videos get released so that you have more time to plan out your bets as we provide these videos on a daily basis. I can guarantee that you'll have all the important information that you'll need on these 5 college basketball games after fully watching this video. One more thing before we start. If you would like to gain access to our best exclusive sports picks to take your journey to the next level, then check out our Patreon in the link down below, where we offer our best single picks, parlay picks, and much more. Now let's get started. Drake versus Northern Iowa. Drake walking into the McLeod Center already feels like a story, the so-called underdog stepping into a building that loves reminding visitors who is supposed to be in charge. Northern Iowa carries the cleaner profile on the surface, sitting at roughly 16-10 while Drake is around 12-15, so the casual fan hears that and expects a comfortable home win and probably stops thinking there. That surface read misses how these two actually play across 40 minutes, and that is where things get interesting for anyone who cares about a number instead of just a straight result. Northern Iowa is built around a controlled, defensive identity, and it shows in their scoring. They put up about 68.5 points a night and allow only about 61.2, which has them sitting at the top of Division I in scoring defense, and that is not a small thing. A team that guards like that usually wins plenty of games, but it also tends to squeeze the margin because every possession is slow, deliberate, and heavy, and that sort of rhythm does not always match the idea of running away from someone on the scoreboard. Drake lives on a different planet stylistically, more chaos, more pace, more swings. They average roughly 77.3 points scored and about 75.1 allowed, so their games often turn into stretches where a 5-minute burst suddenly flips how everything looks. For a favorite that wants a stress-free night, that kind of opponent is nerve-wracking because you can play 30 good minutes and still feel the room tighten if they hit a couple of shots and get out in transition. Against the number, the pattern quietly supports that story. Northern Iowa is solid but not dominant against the spread overall, around 14-11, and when they are asked to play the role of favorite, they are closer to average, sitting around 9-9. Drake is almost the mirror image, struggling badly when expected to handle business, roughly 1-9 when favored, yet turning into a respectable problem when catching points, about 8-7 as an underdog. That is the kind of split that tells you this team wears the underdog hoodie much more comfortably than the favorite suit. There is also the body situation, which people sometimes gloss over until it bites. Northern Iowa is dealing with multiple rotation pieces listed as questionable or out on current reports, which chips away at their ability to keep that defensive intensity and fresh legs rolling in waves. Drake, on the other hand, comes in without anyone formally tagged on the injury sheet for this matchup, so the team that already prefers a freer, wilder style has a better chance to keep that energy and pressure going all night. Layer the rivalry element on top, and the picture sharpens even more. Missouri Valley games in mid-February often feel like small tournaments by themselves, with coaches shortening rotations, fans treating every whistle like a personal attack, and players knowing that resumes and momentum are getting built right now, not later. In that kind of environment, the home side is usually focused on doing just enough to secure the result, while the road side leans into grit, shot variance, and that late-game scramble that bettors know all too well. It is easy to picture Northern Iowa still getting the decision, but with Drake hanging around just enough, trading runs and refusing to fade away cleanly. As our first pick for this matchup, the Drake Bulldogs to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. On one hand, you have Drake, whose season numbers shout tempo and scoring, with games drifting into that 77-75 type zone. On the other hand, you have Northern Iowa, whose profile looks like a coach's old notebook, low 60s allowed, high 60s scored, and scoreboard after scoreboard that feels like someone put a lid on the rim. Drake games often lean toward the higher side, simply because of the way they play. They are comfortable in faster stretches, they accept some defensive leakage for the chance to push the pace, and that has produced more overs than unders overall. It is the classic trade-off, fun for neutral fans, slightly terrifying if you are trying to predict whether both teams will keep up that scoring all night. Northern Iowa pulls that energy in the opposite direction. Their season results are packed with totals that land in a tighter, lower band, reflecting that combination of patient half-court offense and smothering defense. Opponents are hitting only around 40.5% from the field and under 28% from three, which is the statistical signature of a team that contests everything and rarely gives away clean looks. When they are listed as the side expected to be in control, they skew heavily toward lower scoring results, with far more games falling short of expectation than sailing past it. Anyone who has watched a Northern Iowa home game knows the feeling of the scoreboard creeping slowly rather than racing. You get long possessions, ball reversals, cuts, and then a contested jumper with 3 seconds on the shot clock. Crowd noise surges on defensive stands instead of constant fast breaks, and that kind of environment tends to drag even more offensive-minded opponents into a more measured rhythm. Drake can still score, of course, but they must do it against the best scoring defense in the country, with the building working against their usual flow and every miss feeding Northern Iowa's comfort zone. For this matchup to land in a clearly high-scoring range, you are probably looking at something unusual. Maybe Drake catches an extended hot streak from deep, or both sides spend the final minutes in a parade to the free throw line with intentional fouls and timeouts. Those things happen, and anyone who has sweated a ticket knows how quickly a quiet game can explode late. But that is not the baseline story the season data and playing styles are telling. The more grounded picture is a tense, possession-by-possession kind of contest, where every basket feels big, the pace stays controlled more often than not, and the final combined number leans toward the quieter side of expectations. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Charleston versus Campbell. Charleston walking into Buies Creek feels a bit like the confident kid strolling into a small-town gym where the bleachers are practically on top of the floor and everybody in the building knows each other's first name. Gore Arena is not huge, but it is loud, and that kind of setting usually gives the home side a natural emotional boost. Even with that, the broader picture still tilts in a pretty familiar direction. Charleston has put together a stronger overall season, stacking up more wins, more consistency, and a more reliable identity, while Campbell has lived closer to that unpredictable middle ground where you are never quite sure which version of the team is going to show up. One night it looks like a fast, freewheeling group that can play with anyone, and the next night it can get stuck in its own bad habits. That volatility makes for fun television, but it is not exactly comforting if you care about which side is more likely to hold up for a full 40 minutes. Charleston, by contrast, has leaned into being that steady, slightly stubborn team that does enough of the little things correctly, even when the game gets ragged. The rebounding, the late-game composure, the willingness to grind through rough stretches, all that adds up. It is not flashy, but it travels well. On top of that, history between these programs is lopsided, with Charleston repeatedly walking out of this matchup, and even this building, with wins and covers. Trends do not decide the future by themselves, sure, but they do hint at a matchup edge that keeps showing up over time. When a team continually finds ways to solve the same opponent, in the same environment, it usually says something about comfort and confidence in that specific clash. Put all of that together, and the side that has already shown it can handle both the building and the matchup still feels like the more trustworthy ticket. As our first pick for this matchup, the Charleston Cougars to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. Everything about Campbell's style suggests noise, pace, and a lot of possessions, and that reputation has followed them around for good reason. Their games often tilt toward high scoring, with long stretches where defense looks more like a suggestion than a rule. That kind of profile naturally pushes people to expect another shootout, especially when the last meeting between these two turned into a track meet that soared past what anyone would call a modest score. It is easy to remember a wild, up-and-down game and assume the sequel will look the same, but sequels are tricky. Charleston brings a different kind of energy to the total. Their overall rhythm has leaned more toward controlled, with a balance that nudges games away from pure chaos. The numbers across their season point to contests that settle into the low to middle scoring range rather than constant fireworks. Recently, their outings have tilted toward lower scores more often than not, which is not an accident. Defensive effort, better shot selection, and a willingness to slow things down just enough have all played a part. That sort of approach can act like a governor on the game, keeping things from spiraling into a full-blown sprint even when the opponent prefers to run. Campbell, for all its scoring punch, has also shown a few signs of tightening up, with some of their latest games landing beneath the kind of totals people associate with them. Late in the season, scouting is sharper, legs are a little heavier, and coaches lean into specific game plans instead of wide-open experimentation. All of that can steal a few points off the scoreboard here and there. So while the matchup name suggests fireworks, the blend of one team's recent tendency toward lower totals and the other's subtle defensive adjustments hints at a game that might not quite reach the kind of lofty number people first picture. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Belmont versus Murray State. Picture yourself staring at this matchup, seeing Belmont sitting there as the team getting points, and wondering if that little extra cushion is a trap or a gift waiting to be unwrapped. On paper, it looks like one of those classic heavyweight mid-major battles, with Belmont sitting on a record around the 23-4 range and Murray State near 19-8, both hanging near the top of the league and very much in that March conversation. Here's the thing, once you look past the logos and the crowd noise, Belmont keeps coming across as the grown-up in the room, the team that handles chaos without blinking. They already hammered Murray State 103-86 in Nashville back on January 31st, and that was not some wild fluke. It was built on spacing, ball movement, and reading the floor like a veteran point guard reads a ball screen. Season-wide numbers back that feeling up because Belmont grades out as one of the more polished offenses in the country with a defense that is comfortably solid, while Murray State brings plenty of firepower but lets opponents score far too easily for a group that wants to be taken seriously in March. Belmont moves the ball, shares touches, and gets quality looks from everywhere, with multiple guys who shoot a very high percentage from the floor and a rotation of three-point threats that stretches a defense until it creaks a little. It is not just about pretty shooting splits either. Their style lets them play in the 80s without needing a frantic scramble. They can get there in rhythm almost like a band that never rushes the tempo but still fills the room. On the road, they have been tough, stringing together win after win away from home and showing they can go into hostile gyms, quiet the crowd for stretches, and still execute late when possessions really start to feel heavy. Against the number, they have been kinder to backers recently than Murray State, which has been far shakier, dropping covers even in games where the scoreboard went their way, and that matters to anyone who has ever stared at a ticket and muttered at a garbage time three. The health report adds another twist, because Belmont has managed all of this while being without one of their key guards, Nick McLean, for the long haul, and with depth guard Win Miller hovering in that uncertain space between out and questionable, which means the backcourt rotation has already had to grow up and get comfortable with pressure. Murray State shows up cleaner on the injury sheet, yet it is still Belmont that has taken control of the recent series, stacking 5 straight wins and covers, and over the last 10 games the Bruins have looked hotter overall, while the Racers have been more up and down. When the supposedly healthier home side has the weaker defense, the more uneven record against the spread, and the recent head-to-head edge sits across the floor, grabbing the points with the team that feels more complete starts to feel less like a gamble and more like a logical play that you can live with if it goes sideways. As our first pick for this matchup, the Belmont Bruins to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. The first meeting between these two turned into a track meet, 189 combined points, Belmont hanging 103 on the board, both teams shooting the ball like the rim was as wide as a hula hoop, and the whole thing had the feel of a pickup game where nobody wants to play defense. Belmont shot over 56% from the field, splashed about half of their threes, and Murray State knocked down a strong share of their own looks while spending plenty of time at the free throw line, which is the kind of afternoon that sticks in your memory and makes any undertalk sound a little crazy at first. Honestly, if you watch that game live, your brain probably still flashes back to the constant scoring and wants to assume that is just what these teams do every time they see each other. But the market already baked that memory in and then cooled on it, opening the total higher and seeing early sharp money lean toward a slightly lower number, which is a quiet signal that yes, both offenses are dangerous, but everything had to fall perfectly to get that kind of explosion again. Both attacks are legit by mid-major standards. They are efficient, they know what they want to get, and they can string together scoring runs in a hurry, yet Belmont brings a sturdier defense to the table while Murray State's end of the floor leaks more often and invites some ugly stretches when the shots stop falling. That defensive gap matters because it gives at least one side a real chance to slow things down just a bit, to force more half-court possessions, and to make each trip feel more like solving a puzzle than running a fast break drill. Recent trends do screen points at first glance, with both teams cashing plenty of overs lately, which fans love because nobody complains about buckets. But when you zoom in on these Sunday spots, a different rhythm shows up, with a lot of those games sneaking under as legs get tired and coaching adjustments start to pile up. Those Sunday patterns, like Belmont hitting the under in a large chunk of recent Sunday games and Murray State doing the same in several of their own, especially at home, tell a story about pace, fatigue, and game plans becoming more deliberate once everyone has enough film on each other. Add in the fact that Belmont is missing at least one important guard, which trims their ball handling depth and makes a wild, constant up-and-down game slightly less appealing from a strategic standpoint, and suddenly it is easier to imagine a version of this rematch where we see more set plays, more clock used, and fewer of those frantic, back-and-forth haymakers that blew the lid off the first meeting. It is still risky to bet against points with two offenses that can light it up in a matter of minutes, and nobody pretending otherwise has ever watched a late foul fest. But with that first game sitting in the rearview mirror as the perfect storm and this spot hinting at some natural regression, the lean shifts toward a lower scoring script that tests your patience but makes sense on paper. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Seton Hall versus Butler. Hinkle on a Sunday night has that weird mix of church and chaos, and this matchup fits right into that mood. Seton Hall walks in with the confidence of a team that has taken real punches in Big East play and is still standing, sitting at 17-8 overall with a dead-even league record that screams battle-tested rather than lucky. They have already tasted how dangerous Butler can be after that loss in Newark, and that kind of sting usually sits with a veteran locker room all month, especially when the schedule hands you a clear revenge shot in a building every college hoops fan recognizes on sight. The Pirates have leaned into a very specific personality this season, and it travels better than most shiny offensive numbers. They are built on defensive toughness, sturdy rebounding, and a willingness to turn every possession into a small street fight, and the metrics back it up, with their scoring defense graded among the better units nationally and their rebounding holding up against different styles. That is not glamorous, but on the road, when legs get tired and jumpers flatten out, the team that can still dig in for one more stop usually feels pretty comfortable laying a small favorite tag. Butler on the other side has been living a very different life lately, and not in a fun way. They started the year hot, piling up non-conference wins and scoring for fun, but conference play has turned into a harsh reality check, with a 13-12 overall mark and a 4-10 Big East record that reflects how often their defense has been put under the spotlight. Look at the recent stretch, getting tagged by St. John's, Georgetown, Providence, Marquette, and Connecticut in a row, often giving up big numbers and letting games slip in the second half, and you can feel how much pressure lands on their offense every night now. That is the interesting tension here, because Butler does have that Hinkle comfort, the crowd, the familiarity, the sight lines, all the little things that can help a jump shooting team settle in, but they are running straight into a Seton Hall group that thrives when the game tilts toward toughness rather than rhythm. The first meeting showed it in a loud way, with Butler pounding the paint, living at the line, and turning aggressive drives into free points. But that also means the film for Seton Hall is brutally clear, and teams with their defensive pride rarely accept being bullied twice by the same opponent in the same season. Seton Hall just handled Providence in another physical game and refound their own scoring punch while staying true to their identity, and that blend of improved form, revenge angle, and defensive edge sets them up nicely when the number is asking them to do little more than be the steadier, more composed side for 40 minutes. Put it all together, and the team with the more reliable defense, the cleaner recent performance, and the sharper sense of who they are looks better equipped to absorb Butler's early energy, weather the inevitable run, and still finish inside the number as road favorites when it matters most. As our first pick for this matchup, the Seton Hall Pirates to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Butler has spent most of the season pushing games into faster, higher-scoring territory, leaning on tempo, spacing, and shot-making to solve problems that their defense has created, and their schedule shows a long string of contests where both teams have ended up trading buckets rather than trading stops. You can see it in that 2-overtime shootout win over Providence, in the losses where the opponent still had room to flirt with the 90s, and in how often their games turn into track meets once the first few threes drop and the building wakes up. Seton Hall walks in with the opposite instinct, and that friction is where the total really lives. They are comfortable grinding the pace, shrinking possessions, and trusting that their defense and rebounding will eventually drag the game back toward their comfort zone, even when the opponent wants to run. Even their recent win over Providence, which turned into a pretty lively scoreboard night, came from controlled half-court execution, efficient shooting, and a very low turnover number rather than a reckless decision to play wide open for 40 minutes. The most fascinating piece of evidence for this rematch is that first game in Newark. The final score landed in that mid-range where both offenses looked respectable, but the path there was wild, with a staggering amount of free throws, 70-plus attempts combined, turning the game into a parade to the line rather than a clean, free-flowing offensive show. When a game gets that whistle-heavy, scoring can look inflated in a way that does not always carry over to the next meeting, especially when both coaching staffs spend a month complaining in private about the foul count and drilling discipline on closeouts and verticality. In a second meeting, officials often adjust a bit, players adjust a lot, and the teams themselves lean into the tweaks that annoyed them the most on film. For Seton Hall, that likely means even more structure on defense, fewer risky reaches, and a bigger focus on forcing Butler to finish over bodies instead of gifting easy points at the stripe. For Butler, it probably means a little more patience, a few more passes before the shot, and an emphasis on avoiding those empty, rushed possessions that fed runs for opponents during this losing streak. All of that quietly pulls things away from another foul fest and toward a game where every bucket is a bit more earned and every trip up the floor eats more clock than Butler would really like. Hinkle will add energy, and there will be stretches where Butler's offense feels like it is dragging the total upward, but the combination of Seton Hall's defensive stubbornness, their recent reminder of how ugly that many whistles can make a game, and Butler's need to tighten up their shot selection points more toward a contest that plays slightly tighter and more controlled than the raw reputation suggests. When you step back from the noise, it feels more like a Big East grind that flirts with fireworks rather than a pure shootout from start to finish, and that tilts the expectation toward a scoreline that finishes under what the market is asking for. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Towson versus Monmouth. Picture a February night on the Jersey Shore, with Towson walking into Monmouth's building for a Coastal Athletic Association matchup that feels a lot bigger than the schedule grid suggests. On paper, the records look almost mirror-like, with Towson sitting at roughly 14-12 and Monmouth around 13-12, so it is easy to think this is a coin flip kind of game. Odds makers have nudged Monmouth into the small home favorite role, not by a huge margin, more like a respectful nod to the home floor and recent form than a bold stance. The twist is that this is not a fresh matchup. It is a sequel, and sequels in college hoops often come with leftover emotion. In the first meeting on Towson's court, Monmouth walked into the Tigers' slow, physical world, accepted every bump, and still came out with a double-digit win in a 62-48 rock fight that barely crawled up to 110 total points. That kind of game leaves a mark because Towson played more or less the way it wanted to play and still got handled on its own floor. Towson under Pat Scarry leans hard into a blue-collar identity, grinding possessions, shrinking the clock, and trusting a tough half-court defense to drag opponents down into games that feel like long, slow wrestling matches. They do not mind if it looks ugly, they mind if it looks easy for the other side. The idea is simple: force you to work for every catch, every cut, every rebound, and by the final media timeout see who still has legs. Monmouth, on the other hand, has carried a different reputation, more free-flowing, more willing to play with tempo, but this season it has quietly tightened the screws on defense just enough to win close games instead of simply entertaining in them. The Hawks are outscoring teams by a small but real margin across the season, usually by only a bucket or so, yet that adds up when you fold in their home court energy and a stretch of wins that has built real confidence. Recently, the results column has leaned their way, and when a team that used to be all gas no brakes starts pairing buckets with stops in front of its own fans, the building tends to feel a little different. Against the spread, that story has shown up in the numbers. Monmouth has been modestly profitable on the ticket window while Towson has lagged a bit, especially when the Tigers leave home and lose the comfort of their own rims and routine. That is not some dramatic gulf, more like a steady drip of evidence that one team is often a little undervalued and the other a touch overvalued when the market posts its numbers. Psychologically, this spot tilts toward Monmouth. The Hawks already proved they can win playing Towson's slow, physical script on the road, and now they bring that memory back home along with their crowd, their confidence, and a spread that more or less asks them to just be the better team again for 40 minutes. Honestly, when a team embraces your style, beats you with it in your own gym, and then gets to host the rematch with only a small tax from the odds makers, that tells a pretty clear story about which side has the momentum and the more comfortable path to cashing a ticket. As our first pick for this matchup, the Monmouth Hawks to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. The first game between these two teams was a reminder that some teams can drag almost any opponent into a mud fight. That 62-48 final was the kind of box score that looks like it came from an earlier era, not from a modern college game. Oddsmakers have bumped the current projected number into a more normal range for a college matchup, which is their way of saying they expect a cleaner offensive night than what we saw the first time. Here is the thing, Towson's season profile keeps arguing for a slower, lower game. Their offense lives in the high 60s, and their defense tends to hold opponents in that same neighborhood, which usually lands combined scores around the middle of the scale rather than in shootout territory. The Tigers' style keeps possessions limited, which means even a few empty trips can swing an under because there simply are not that many chances to put points on the board. It is like watching a football team that bleeds the play clock every snap. The margin for error on an over shrinks, while an under can survive a surprise burst or two as long as the grind returns. Monmouth's numbers across the full season do tilt a little higher. Their games have often landed in slightly more generous scoring ranges, but context matters a lot here. Against this specific opponent, in that first meeting, the Hawks showed they were willing to slow down, deal with contact, and win in a game that never even sniffed the kind of combined total that most projections would have suggested beforehand. Trend-wise, the season-long ledger lines up with that story. Monmouth has played close to even against the total with a small lean toward lower scoring results, and at home that tilt toward unders has been even more noticeable. Towson's track record is even more stark. Their schedule is littered with unders, especially when they travel, which is what you would expect from a team that prioritizes defense, pace control, and half-court execution over fireworks. Oddsmakers have started shading their numbers higher late in the year, likely trying to catch public money that does not love betting unders, but that adjustment can leave totals sitting a touch above what these game states usually support. Monmouth's recent stretch of higher scoring games, with several overs in a short span, feeds right into that, because people remember the fun ones and forget the slog, and the market naturally bakes that memory into the next number. The catch is that the fun version of Monmouth came mostly against opponents more willing to run or less sturdy on defense, while Towson wants every possession to feel like a trip to the dentist, slow, a little unpleasant, and not something you count on for highlight reels. When you combine that first meeting that stayed well under what was expected, two season profiles that lean toward lower scoring outcomes, a defensive-oriented road team, and a projection that still assumes a smoother offensive rhythm than these two normally provide, the picture points pretty clearly in one direction for the total. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. That's all for now, so if you have any other games you would like reviewed, then leave a comment down below with the game you would like analyzed, subscribe to our channel, leave a like on this video, and we'll get to it as soon as we possibly can. We would also love to hear your opinion on the picks presented to you in this video, whether you agree or disagree with them, so leave a comment down below and do let us know.